Let me now briefly introduce our speaker and Rappaport Distinguished Visiting Professor, Senator Doug Jones, who, by the way, will be with us in residence for the spring semester. He's already teaching a seminar. I assume some of the students here are from that seminar. That's entitled The United States Senate Today, How It Works, Why It Doesn't, which is a real-time study of the day-to-day workings of the United States Senate. Doug Jones is a native Alabamian, a graduate of the University of Alabama and Cumberland School of Law at Stanford University. For several years after law school, he served in the public sector, first working as staff counsel to the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee for then Alabama Senator Howard Heflin, and then as an assistant U.S. attorney. He then joined a private law firm in Birmingham, Alabama. In 1997, President Bill Clinton appointed Senator Jones to be U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama. He was engaged in two incredibly important cases, one of which was the successful prosecution of two Ku Klux Klan members arising out of the 1963 Birmingham church bombing that killed 4 African-American girls. And the second was the indictment of a domestic terrorist named Eric Rudolph for bombing the all-women healthcare center in Birmingham. I don't think you can overstate the importance of these cases. He returned to private practice at the conclusion of Clinton's presidency in 2001. In 2017, Doug Jones shocked the political establishment by winning a special election to fill a U.S. Senate seat in Alabama, the first Democrat to do so in 25 years. As a member of the Banking and Housing Committee, the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, and the Committee on Aging, quickly becoming a personal favorite of mine, he quickly built a reputation as a well-regarded and effective legislator. He passed more than 24 bipartisan bills into law in just 3 years, including legislation to end the military widows tax, provide permanent funding for historically Black colleges and universities, shed light on civil rights era cold cases, and expand access to broadband in rural communities. He was also one of the principal architects of anti-money laundering legislation passed by the Congress in 2020. He's been the recipient of multiple awards. We're absolutely delighted to have him here as the Rappaport Distinguished Visiting Professor. His topic for today is timely, engaging, and extremely important. The title is The State of American Democracy, a New Three-Lantern Warning in the Old North Church. After his remarks, we will still have some time for Q&A. If the technology works, we'll alternate between live questions here. Lissy will have a microphone, and people who are listening online will take you through the chat function of the Q&A. Though it's quite unusual for someone from Boston, let alone a boy like me from Brooklyn, New York, to say such a thing, I find myself more than happy in this case to introduce Senator Jones and to say, roll tide.
Thank you, Dan. Let's just stop on a high note with roll tide. I mean, I am really honored to be here with you today. I really mean that. It is, I've had friends that have graduated from Boston College. In fact, one of my old buddies, Don Stern, taught here some and is watching from home today, assuming the technology is working. But it was interesting because last spring, right after I left the Senate, I did a fellowship at Georgetown University. So when I told my wife, Louise, who's with me here today, she was also known as the deputy senator when I was in office. When I told Louise, I said, I can't quite figure this out. I don't know if the folks at these universities actually think I'm distinguished, which she just laughed at, obviously, or if the Jesuits are trying to convert me. I'm not sure exactly which. In any event, I am so honored to be the Rappaport Distinguished Visiting Professor. My only regret is that I am the first visiting professor that will not have the benefit of the wisdom of Jerry Rappaport, who passed away in December. But I know his legacy will live on through the center, through the students that have come through this university, and all the faculty that he touched. I want to talk a little bit today, as Dan said, about the state of American democracy. A new three-lantern warning in the Old North Church, appropriate for Boston. One of the more popular spots in Boston's Freedom Trail is at the Boston North End, in the shadow of the Old North Church, which is a bronze sculpture. That bronze sculpture immortalizes a Boston silversmith named Paul Revere, who firmly reining in his galloping steed. It's the artist's depiction of Revere's midnight ride, the legendary dash to warn the colonial militia of the presence of British troops on the eve of the American Revolutionary War. Paul Revere led an accomplished life, but as our young nation evolved rapidly after shedding British control, his famous ride became more. It became a symbol of collective pride. His commitment and bravery demonstrated a genuine patriotism forged by unwavering dedication to a common cause. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's poem, Paul Revere's Ride, written in 1860, helped embed the story as an essential American lore. A prominent abolitionist, Longfellow constructed the tale as a call for national unity in the face of a breakaway threat from southern states. At the time, America was struggling with growing discord and divergence, primarily over the issue of slavery. When the poem was first published in the Atlantic in January 1861, South Carolina had just become the first state to secede from the United States of America. Think about that. A state saying we no longer want to be part of the United States of America, a people saying we no longer want to be a part of this great democracy. It's really as much from Longfellow's poem as history books that we all know the story. If the British march from land or sea to the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light, one if by land, two if by sea. Well, that night, 2 lanterns were hung in the old North Church belfry, signifying that British troops were in fact moving along the river by boat. And Paul Revere set out on his famous ride, and as they say, the rest is history. Farmers and militia succeeded in thwarting the British. It's a story of American courage and American unity against a common enemy. Over the centuries, folks, America's power and prestige has only grown globally to where I don't think there is any question we have and we are the greatest country that this planet has ever produced. While we no doubt continue to face threats from abroad, from the land and the sea, now by air and cyberspace, it seems that perhaps more than any time since the Civil War, the greatest threat to the ideas that created this country is coming from within, from the very deep divisions we see in Americans that are only growing deeper. Just as Longfellow was moved to spotlight Paul Revere's story as the United States was being tested by internal turmoil just before the Civil War, we're dealing with a historic moment that requires a rallying cry, I believe, for American solidarity in the face of what would divide us, what is dividing us. I believe that these divisions call for a new warning in the Old North Church. Not 1 lantern by land, 2 if by sea, but 3 lanterns. 3 lanterns to signify a warning of the divisions within. 3 lanterns in every city and every town in America, in as many places as possible, signifying that our greatest threat is the divisions among us. The culture that has moved beyond simply a culture of contempt to a culture of hate. And you all know what I'm talking about. And we need legions of modern day Paul Reveres to spread the message. Think about what we've witnessed in this country just over the last few years, and especially in the last 15 or 16 months. Racism has reared its ugly head in ways we haven't seen in a long, long time. All negative news is fake news. It's not to be believed, even if it's factually correct and accurate. Faith in our elections has been eroded to the point that I'm not sure anyone on either side of the political aisle will have confidence in them as we move into 2022. a serious problem. Across the country, partisan legislators are enacting laws under the guise of election integrity that are clearly designed to suppress vote and subvert elections. And at some point, for you law students, look at these laws real carefully. I think what you'll see is that, in fact, they don't do anything to protect against fraud. For instance, closing polling places at 5 o'clock and at 7 o'clock is not going to stop fraud. Fraudsters come out at all times, not just at night. So look at those laws very carefully. And then, of course, there was January 6, 2021, when insurrectionists, and frankly, I'll call them domestic terrorists, even if Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz won't. That's what they were, in my view. Insurrection and domestic terrorists attacked the United States Capitol, the beacon of freedom and democracy around the world, attacked in order to try and stop the peaceful transfer of power following an American election. And the list goes on and on and on. But as you sit here today, if you think that I am just another Democrat about to start railing against Republicans and the political right for where we are in this country and where we find ourselves, you would be wrong. I've said for some time now that Democrats and progressives are not without sin in all of this, not by any stretch. Talk of socialism and defunding the police by some of the loudest in the Democratic Party have contributed to the fear that many have about the direction this country is taking. I know it firsthand from people I talk to in my home state. You probably know it. You may even feel it, but you certainly probably know it from friends or relatives. Folks are legitimately concerned about those, even though neither are going to happen. Last week, as I was beginning to prepare these remarks for this address, the New York Times published a guest essay by Jonathan Rauch of the Brookings Institution and Peter Wenner, W-E-H-N-E-R. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. My apologies if I'm not. He is of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and the piece was entitled, "What's Happening on the Left is No Excuse for What's Happening on the Right." And I have to tell you, folks, that they nailed it. I would encourage you to read that guest editorial of last week. I could have just read the entire thing to you today and sat down. They begin with this: American democracy has often confronted hostile forces from outside the United States, but rarely has it been under as much of a threat from forces within the nation. The danger arises from illiberalism on the left and the right. Both sides are chipping away at the foundations of the American Republic, and each side seems oblivious to its own defects. Like I say, I think they nailed it. I would add that if folks are oblivious to their own defects, they tend to get entrenched in their positions and pushing back on those they disagree with without even listening to the concerns that others may have. In essence, it is Newton's third law of motion for any of you who actually studied physics. I took a course, but I remember that Newton's third law of motion being applied. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's third law of motion is what we are experiencing in American politics today. A reaction on the right produces an equal and opposite reaction on the left, and vice versa. Clearly, that is not a good sign. So it shouldn't be surprising in this age of instant news and opinions that are at your fingertips on your phones, an age where our media is often more about entertainment and ratings than facts and actual news, where people get rich. Y'all need to be looking at this, folks. Follow the money, lawyers. People get rich off of stoking the divisions that we have in this country, whether it is on radio or online or in mainstream media. People are making money by stoking the divisions that we have in this country, where conservatives are fearful of a cancel culture, a country where free speech and religious liberty is curtailed as many on the left actually espouse. And we've seen it time and time again. But as the writers of the Times piece noted, while fears about the left are well grounded, they have blinded many conservatives to the greater danger posed today by the right, which is a threat to our constitutional order and therefore a threat to conservatism itself. Make no mistake, folks, make no mistake, the threat to democracy coming from the right is more immediate and more dangerous in so many ways. At no time in our history of this country has a president attempted to overturn an election by illegitimate means. Those are facts. That's just not political speech. Yes, there have been challenges in the past. There have been lawsuits in the past. Bush versus Gore is probably the most famous. But nowhere has it happened that when those lawsuits and challenges failed, there was not a peaceful transfer of power, even if the concessions were somewhat tepid. Not so in 2020. Not so. When lawsuit after lawsuit failed for a complete lack of evidence, where lawyers, the profession, the lawyers, something that you're going to each aspire to, lawyers made a mockery of the legal profession by putting forth to courts just inane, just stupid theories that had no basis in fact, espousing bizarre conspiracy theories with no basis whatsoever. Some are being sanctioned. I hope they all get disbarred. It really cast a bad light on lawyers. Donald Trump during this time continued to wage a campaign of disinformation and pressure tactics to overturn the election results, a campaign that is continuing today. Does anyone really doubt that the January 6th attack on the Capitol was a direct result of the misinformation and fears, importantly, fears generated by former President Trump and his enablers? But sadly, or perhaps frightening, as widely reported in the Times piece noted, rather than spurning Mr. Trump and the efforts the Republican Party of today has embraced them. Around the country, prospective Republican candidates are running on the same stop the steal, lies, and conspiracy theories that failed in court and in audit after audit failed, rather than simply standing for democracy. They insist that going forward, elections be certified by partisans, even in the face of recent revelations just in the last 2 weeks that public officials in a couple of states actually falsified the certifications of electors to be submitted to the Electoral College. Falsified. These are not, hoodlum criminals. These are elected officials, public officials charged with the public trust, and they felt compelled to falsify federal records to go to the Electoral College just to flip a state for Donald Trump. Those are federal crimes, and I'm hoping that the Justice Department will pursue them vigorously. Today, we're seeing governors like Governor DeSantis in Florida, candidates like former Senator and a friend of mine, David Perdue, running elections where they're saying that they want to form election police, integrity police for elections. Can you possibly imagine the potential abuse for something like that? In my state in Alabama, we have already had times and times, even though the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, where sheriffs in some of these rural counties will stand at the polling places to look out for fraud, intimidating Black and brown voters who come to vote. Election integrity police. Come on, folks. We are better than that. And moving this into the hands of partisan electors, partisan certifiers, is a danger. Any Republican today who dares disputes the stop the steal mantra can expect to be targeted by the base, booed at any large gathering of Republicans, censured by party officials, and possibly threatened with physical violence. Those are facts. And I hope that we have some of the young Republicans in this audience today or watching that I know are trying to reform here at BC, and I want you to do it. I really want you to do it. But I don't want you to do it like these guys are doing, that the folks up in Congress and around this country. Do it because you care about this country, not because you care about just simply winning an election. So many today around this country in the Republican Party are shattering people's faith in elections while creating an ends justify the means solution to the concerns that they have about elections. That, folks, can lead to violence. That can lead to violence. You have seen the numbers. Some 40% of Republicans say violence can be justified. And let me say again, and I go back to what I said earlier, these are not just crazy people. These are not folks that are set out to be revolutionaries. They're concerned about this country because the left has created that concern. So the problem is twofold. But folks, ours is a democracy where every person of every hue has equal value. And we do not bow to a monarch or cower before would-be authoritarians. Historically, we've always eventually moved ahead as one, however fraught the advance, however fragile the unity. In the same year, the Atlantic published Longfellow's poem, the magazine's first editor, James Russell Lowell, in endorsing Abraham Lincoln, noted that true policy is gradual in its advance, that it is conditional and not absolute, that it must deal with facts and not with sentiments. 150 years ago, those words were spoken. We need to get back to that, where those on the right or the left accept advances in policy without a my way or the highway approach. Moderates essentially ran this country quite successfully for 250 years, or close to it. We can't ignore their regular, often lamentable inaction over various injustices in this country. But for the most part, recognition that positive change is usually incremental and truth is paramount has served this country well. Lately, we have moved away from that, giving over to our fears and our frustrations, embracing political and cultural absolutisms as the only way forward, and in doing so, ignoring our faults and missteps. From the lost cause of the Confederacy to the intolerance of extreme political correctness, it's like we're scared to admit that we make mistakes. It's scared to admit that we might actually agree with somebody of a different political stripe. And we have to create some alternative reality to try and say, we're just not like those folks. God, I've heard that so many times over my life. What we should be doing is facing some of the ugly truths in this country, not to shame people, but to be able to move on. Move on productively. That's a damn word. Building a better road, a better bridge with the knowledge that the potholes of the past won't ruin the journey who come after, for those that come after, but they'll either be repaired or at least marked to stay clear of. Let me make it clear, if I haven't already, our nation, our republic, our democracy is threatened today. But we will not save it by purging people we don't agree with. Democracy only works if we find ways to compromise when we disagree in order to share our country and enjoy its promise. And that's why today we're under threat like never before. Illiberalism spurns illiberalism. Remember that for every action, there is a reaction. And we tend to see everything as two sides and everything is people running to their corners. Everything is red or blue, good or evil. But maybe instead of Newton's third law of motion, we ought to be thinking about Newton's cradle. Y'all know what Newton's cradle is? You do, you just don't know the name. I didn't either, I had to Google it up. But when I was a kid and I still had, my father had one that I kept after he passed. Newton's Cradle is that little thing that sits on a desk. It's got 5 steel ball bearings. And they're all perfectly aligned, hanging next to each other by some fishing cord. And you pull one out and drop it, and it hits the one next to it, and the one on the opposite end swings out. And it comes back, and it swings, and there is a reaction. It goes, it starts a chain reaction in Newton's Cradle. But if you watch it close, if you've ever had one and you watch it close and you watch it long enough, you'll see that while the reaction from the opposite side is similar, it's just not quite as powerful. If it was truly equal and opposite, it would be in perpetuity. It would never stop. But the opposite reaction is just slightly less. And so sooner or later with Newton's cradle, the reactionary force is less each time as the center, those 3 balls in the middle, hold firm until it gets to a point where they're all 5 moving together, swinging a little bit to the left and then to the right, and then back to the left and to the right. Seems like a pretty dang good model to me for what we need in this country today. So who will be today's Paul Revere's to understand the significance of the 3-lantern signal and warn the citizens of the country about the growing threat to democracy from within? It cannot be simply political pundits, commentators that you see on the news. We got enough of those. It certainly cannot be someone who is galloping down a virtual street, warning only to those on the left that their neighbors on the right are creating the problems, that they're the extremists. Or they can't be warning the people on the left that it is their neighbors on the right side of the virtual highway or virtual road that is creating the problems that they're so concerned about in America. That can't be what modern day Paul Revere's need to do. Again, we got too many of those already. The modern day silversmith who heeds the call has to be the barbers and the stylists, the doctors and nurses, lawyers and accountants, mechanics and seamstresses, students, teachers, faith leaders, agnostics, and moms and dads. That's who needs to be the Paul Revere's of the day. And the warning can't be to take up violence, but to have dialogues instead of monologues, to get out of their political comfort zones, to talk about the state of our government. By that, I mean talk about long-term goals and objectives that we can all agree on, not political power. Engage more, not less. Listen and understand. To do what Atticus Finch of To Kill a Mockingbird fame said, to walk around in another man's skin and see things from their point of view. It's the only way. We need more Paul Revere's today, voices and leaders that do not just sound the alarm of the 3-lantern signal, but rally all Americans, regardless of political party, regardless of ideology, to come together, to use their common sense to find common ground, to step away from fear and hate and toward each other instead, to build a true pro-democracy coalition, a coalition of Americans committed to finding ways to solve our problems together. I believe that for America to survive, the center, just like on Newton's cradle, the center has got hold. And we must empower voices that build from the middle out, despite the concerns. And we could go on forever with all the list of the concerns. But despite the concerns I just outlined, I remain forever hopeful, with confidence in you and the American people. I've seen things like that firsthand. I have felt hope and optimism among the people of America, whether it was successfully prosecuting the 1963 church bombing case that people thought we could never bring to justice, or winning a special election in 2017 in a state that nobody gave us a chance to win, and nobody gave a voice like mine a chance to win in a very, very conservative state. I've seen that hope. I've seen the optimism. I share that hope and that optimism. And we should all remain confident in ourselves, in our brothers and sisters, and our fellow human beings, regardless of their race, religion, their sexual orientation, you name it. We should all remain vigilant, and we should remain confident that, as Longworth wrote 150 years ago, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will waken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of the steed and the midnight message of Paul Revere. Thank you all very much.
A question from a student first.
Student question. Okay,
Student.
I've completely overwhelmed everybody.
Okay. Not yet.
Not a student.
Not yet. I don't
student.
think you're a
Come
student.
on, folks.
yet.
I see some of my class in here. Somebody asked.
Exactly. You got a little peer pressure.
And by the way, look,
You are a brave soul.
there's nothing off limits for any of this. I'm not that kind of person, so whatever.
All right. Thank you, Senator, for giving that wonderful address. I am one of the students in your class,
Yes.
Zach. It was nice meeting you yesterday. Great meeting you again today. So my question is, given the state of American democracy today, given the concerns you outlined regarding elections, and given the recent defeat of Democratic-led efforts to overturn the filibuster and enact voting reform, what is the step forward? What should government officials be doing, and what should individual citizens be doing to prepare for 2022?
Well, it's a complicated question. It's a very good question. I appreciate that. First of all, I'm not giving up on voting rights reform. I think it's badly needed. I think the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 a number of years ago in a case that came right out of Alabama, as most voting rights cases did. Shelby County, which is right south of where Louise and I live. We need to put some teeth back in there. You know, just yesterday, a 3-judge panel, 2 of whom were Donald Trump appointees, issued a preliminary injunction saying that the gerrymandered district lines the Republican legislature drew are in violation of the Voting Rights Act. So there's still some teeth. There's still a little bit of bite to it. But we need the pre-clearance. We need some other things. I'm not giving up on that. Okay, I'm not giving up, and I don't think that my colleagues in the Senate who work so hard on this, including Senator Manchin, are going to give up on that. The issue is really the Senate rules, which I got to tell you are arcane, that need to be revised. When I was in the Senate in 1979, not as a senator, but as a staffer for the late Senator Howell Heflin. And the Senate really operated. It's a completely different Senate today than it was then. And they operated, there's a book, if anybody are interested in the Senate, called The Last Great Senate by Ira Shapiro. Amazing book, about 3 or 4 years in that time period. And the Senate operated in a different way, where it truly was a deliberative body. And there was what they call a talking filibuster, where if you wanted to stop some legislation, you really had to talk it through. You know, Southern Democrats had used that to block legislation for so long. But the fact is, the filibuster is designed simply to give the minority a voice. So you just couldn't be run over. It was designed to give a voice. And with a good faith minority, you can work, because what happened in those days, you would have a filibuster, and whoever was trying to get a voice held the floor, and the whole time they were holding the floor, Democrats and Republicans are meeting in the majority leader's office or the minority leader's office or in the cloakrooms, and they're working out some differences. And sooner or later, it was time to break the closure, to give a cloture vote, and they would vote on it. And even those who voted against the bill would vote to end debate and let it, because they had had a voice. They had the opportunity to debate and to do things. And for those that are not in the class, I'm giving away everything that we're going to talk about in my class next week. Okay. So that's a couple of things. That's part of your question. The other thing is, I think that people have to be vigilant. I don't know if we'll get any voting rights legislation. But I think we got to just turn it on against folks. I think we just got to turn what's happening in Georgia and Texas and some of these other states and say, okay, you're going to put up, we've had barriers before and we've overcome them, and we shall overcome again. And there are significant barriers that are being put up. And I think people have to mobilize. It's going to make it more expensive. People are not going to have comments. Mark my word, if there is no voting rights legislation at all. And by the way, I told folks early on to try to do voting rights when the stop the steal and the fraud first came up, because I've always believed that the way to ensure some integrity would to have everybody playing by the same set of rules. The Constitution kind of gives the states the right to do elections, but it also says that Congress can step in, like Congress did in 1965. Have everybody playing off the same page. I think that would instill confidence. But we got to continue to work on that, and we got to just continue to do and understand the laws as they are, and have people vote. The best way to challenge the voting right laws is to win elections and to get out the vote and show them that we will not be moved, and we will get out and do some things. That's the only way we can do this right now, and to keep it up. But I will say this quickly. You're not going to be able to do that by simply, if you just, all you care about doing is censoring Joe Manchin or Kristen Sinema. Forget that. Go back home and organize. Do what John Lewis said, cause a little good trouble. Stand up, speak out, and we'll work it out. Thank you.
We're going to take a question from somebody online.
This is a question from a student of yours as well, Elizabeth Guin. She wrote, hi, Senator Jones, thank you for your talk. What are your thoughts on today's Supreme Court in question of its legitimacy?
Well, the Supreme Court is still legitimate. I do fear, if y'all didn't hear that, the question was on the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. I do think that the Supreme Court has been damaged a lot. Congress is part to blame for that. Supreme Court nominations that started with the Robert Bork nomination have gotten pretty ugly. They are now political campaigns. During the Kavanaugh vote, hundreds of thousands, if not a couple of $1 million, were spent on TV ads that were really not designed to get me to influence my vote. It was just designed to raise the awareness for the political campaign that would come, regardless of how I vote. And so it's become very political. And you know it's become political when you see the justices like Justice Breyer and Justice Thomas and others having to go public and say, no, we're not political. You know it's become political. The American public thinks it's political. And if the American public thinks it's political, it is political. And we've seen, and too many times when we've seen the Supreme Court appear to be looking for, to advance a political agenda and not a judicial philosophy. There's a big difference. So I think that there's a real problem with the Supreme Court right now. It's one of image, and hopefully that can be salvaged. I don't know. It remains to be seen. But I know Congress is not helping the situation with the hyperbole around every nomination. And it didn't, again, it started with Bork. Clarence Thomas's confirmation was just as ugly. Ruth Bader Ginsburg had a pretty easy time. Scalia had a pretty easy time. But lately, it's been tough. When Merrick Garland didn't even get a hearing, that was unconscionable. Merrick Garland didn't get a hearing, but Justice Comey Barrett did. I'm sorry, Mitch. You can say all you want to, but you really can't reconcile those two positions. And those also create the divisions that I talked about, where people go to their corners over Supreme Court nominees, lifetime appointments. And doing away with a filibuster did hurt in that aspect. So for the record, I do not support packing the court. I do not think that that's the way to do this. Elections have consequences, and we'll deal with it that way. I think you can make some tweaks to the Supreme Court rules and procedures, but I certainly don't agree with packing the Supreme Court just to achieve an agenda. That makes no sense to me. That would be I would be doing what I'm criticizing the other folks.
All right, another student. Okay. Uh-oh.
Hi, Senator. Thank you for being here. First of all, as a Georgian, my condolences to Alabama.
All right, somebody kick that kid out. of here. That is no way to be hospitable.
So my question is, you talk about the division in the country and the lack of moderation recently. The question I have is that we live in a world where technology has created this kind of division in a way that's unprecedented. We don't have and I think you mentioned that we don't have really a singular media anymore, and people live in bubbles. Polls show that, for example, a significant number of Republicans don't believe that Joe Biden is the legitimate president or that he won the election legitimately. How do you suppose we should approach that problem in the future as technology become even more increasing and people will live in these kind of bubbles
Yeah,
more now than ever before?
it's a great question, and it's a huge problem that's going to take time to work out. We're still getting used to this, and people are in their bubbles. They're in their silos. And while so many Republicans don't think that Joe Biden was legitimately elected, there's a hell of a lot of Democrats that don't think Donald Trump was elected legitimately, that Vladimir Putin elected, despite what the Mueller report said. So it really is a problem and that we're not used to yet. We are just not used to having that information that you don't know whether it's accurate or not, or whether it's just opinion. And people have got to, I think, and it's really going to fall on your generation and others to be vigilant, to siphon through what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, and to try to encourage people to get outside of their comfort zones, to not just watch Fox News, to not just watch MSNBC, to not just listen to Steve Bannon or someone on the left, but to get outside of those comfort zones and explore the facts. It is going to take time. I do think that you will see efforts to rein in some big tech down the road. You're seeing that already. And I do think that part of the problem has been, it's kind of been like the wild, wild west with social media. And they've also been about money and driving. And I think you're going to see some efforts to rein that in just a little bit. I don't want to see efforts to put a stranglehold on social media, but they do need to be responsible citizens and rein some in. But it's a difficult problem. It's just going to take time. I wish I had a better answer.
Yeah, we have a couple questions on virtually that's kind of going back to some of the voting questions. So, yep. One participant asked, did you see the ruling yesterday in Alabama on redistricting? A unanimous 3-judge court ruled that the Alabama state legislature must draft a new congressional map that complies with the Voting Rights Act. So he's kind of asking for your thoughts on that.
Now, I jumped for joy last night. I ran upstairs. I told Louise, I said, "My God, we won one." You know what the Alabama legislature did is so typical of so many. Let me tell you something, guys. Let's just go back. I'm gonna just gerrymandering with whatever political party it is. Gerrymandering is the worst thing that has happened in American politics. If we could get rid of it, you would be amazed what a difference for the better that this country would take. It is awful, and it is where people are selecting. You know, I mean, those in power are selecting who they want to vote for them, and the Alabama legislature did exactly that. They protected themselves. They protected every incumbent. They contorted to draw some lines, not as bad as they were, but they absolutely did. When that ruling clearly, our census count clearly shows that Alabama should have a second minority majority district, clearly, and they just ignored it. They completely ignored it to protect incumbents. But Alabama's African-American population is such, and it is located in places in the state that we should have one. which means that Alabama should have an opportunity to have 2 Democrats in the House of Representatives rather than just 1 out of 7. We were lucky we didn't lose one. So I was thrilled. And by the way, that is the case that I was saying. That 3-judge panel contained 2 Donald Trump U.S. District nominees, both of whom I voted for, because I believe they had judicial philosophies that are conservative, but they didn't have judicial agendas. And I think that they just proved it. So I'm all for it. I hope there will be more around the country that have success like that. I'll try to quit talking so much.
Well, we're out of
We're out of time. Oh, fun.
We're out of
Thank you so
time.
much.
Okay. Sorry, guys.